councils to provide for it. So the spatial plan does provide an opportunity to direct that infrastructure funding side of things through developer levies or potentially targeted rates. So you may have heard that we have had a very small decline in population over the last 5 years, and that's true. So previous projections had a more bullish projection. The orange line there is actual population growth, and we've had a very, very small decline through this atypical period with COVID. Our old projections that we had from 2 years ago are the blue line. Our latest projections, which we got from Sense Partners this year, are in green. And this shows we do still have significant growth coming to us over the longer term. So less in the short term than previously projected, but there is a significant amount coming, and it's, yeah.
Do you want to receive question now, or you want to go ahead?
I'm happy to clarify on this if...
Okay. Councillor Calvert and Councillor Deputy Mayor McNulty.
Yeah, look, I know when we did the spatial plan, to me it was just like a zoning plan. It wasn't actually understanding where our economic areas were, other than zoning for town centres or neighbourhood centres and that. And so, and I know talking with officers that this would be a more of an evolution to our next spatial plan. So can you just explain brief, how is this going to look differently other than, perhaps changing some zoning colours? Is this actually plan going to look differently to the last version?
Perhaps I'll go through the presentation. We do have more content to cover. I'm happy to clarify this slide, but it would probably be better to get through the content because I do cover some of that.
Councillor, Deputy Mayor McNulty.
My question was this, just roughly, is it about 2032 we return to our peak population on actuals? I was just making a rough guess of a piece of paper here.
Yes, that's roughly matches my understanding, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Compton, I will get back to you in a second, but officers, you can continue now.
Thank you. So the 24 district plan did end up altering the growth pattern that was set out in the 21 spatial plan. So this was due to central government direction around enabling medium density across the city. So the map on the left was the growth pattern identified in the 21 spatial plan. The map on the right is a translation of the 24 district plan into the colour scheme used in that for the purposes of comparability. So the upzoning around centres is largely the same, but the big shift is that we now have medium density enabled right across the city. So it is somewhat of a different growth pattern. So to quickly summarise the core problem that we're seeking to address through this update, we have a new district plan and it provides for a significant increase in development capacity for options to develop. But not all those options are infrastructure enabled. So there is also uncertainty around the location of take-up, where that will be taken up by developers. Our past district plan had a much lower level of development enabled, so the location of development was much more predictable. So to enable that development, we need an understanding of where the market is likely to go and where we can get the best value for money in enabling development out of our infrastructure prioritisation. So the update to the spatial plan will have a specific scope. We're not looking to replace all of the 21 spatial plan. It was a very heavily consulted process, and a lot of it remains relevant. So we will retain key parts of the 21 Spatial Plan and look to build on that as a progression. So the update will focus on long-term growth and changes in urban form, and importantly, it'll focus on the infrastructure and other council support required to realise the growth options enabled by the 24 District Plan. We'll also look to get greater consistency with other council strategies. I'll hand over to Mike for this one. Thank you.
And I think this slide probably speaks to Councillor Calvert's question around, I guess, what's meaningfully going to change. So in terms of what we intend with the Spatial Plan update, it's really to guide that infrastructure planning investment to realise urban development opportunities. We want to look ahead to reform and see what will be required under that, and there's quite a significant influence on being a lot more detailed around how you plan for growth in cities and how you sequence investment to unlock opportunities. And what we will be looking to you for guidance on next year will be around your priorities, around where that investment is best to take place. So that is quite a difference from what we had in the existing Spatial Plan, which was a little bit of a blueprint around zoning. This is really where would you like to invest to unlock the opportunities that are the best value for money and provide the best yield. So we'll have some advice to help inform your discussions on that in the new year. And that will be really useful to inform your long-term planning processes when you're starting to have considerations around things like levels of service, when you're thinking about things like investment required for different assets, and then that will be reflected in things like your infrastructure strategy and your financial strategy, which you'll approve alongside your long-term plan. So that'll help drive some of your budget decisions. And it will be directly interfacing with those LTP processes. One of the things that's useful to understand, I guess, with the LTP and where the Spatial Plan is quite helpful is that LTPs are quite often focused on that first 10 years, where there's a little bit more certainty around your budget. This is looking out beyond that. So under the new legislation, it's proposed that spatial plans will have at least a 30-year time horizon, but we can expect to see a much longer time frame that council should be planning for. The other thing too is that with the transition from development contributions to developer levies, it will be quite useful to have a bit of a framework to understand where investment might be ring-fenced. There is quite a change proposed through that system, and we'll be providing some advice to you on that in the new year for a submission that will be made on local government financing. And the other thing that will be useful for the Spatial Plan update is that it'll help you to provide some direction to Te Aki Wai around where you think they should be prioritising investment, because we will need their support to unlock development opportunities also. The other useful thing for the Spatial Plan update is that it will help provide a clear list of priorities for the council to unlock development in the city, and that can be used to inform conversations with regional and central government, but also with the private sector and network utility operators. I'll hand back over to Joe to talk about the new legislation.
Thank you. So the new planning bill that came out last week has some very specific direction around spatial planning. It requires every region to have a regional spatial plan that will integrate a number of plans. So one of the things the most important thing for us, I think it does, is promote the integration of development planning with infrastructure planning and investment, which has been a pretty big missing piece of the planning system. It also looks, the new system separates environmental and urban planning into two different bills, so it looks to reconcile the plans under those two different bills, two different acts, and to provide for use and development within environmental limits. A big thing that the direction under the planning bill provides is statutory integration. So between plans produced under the Planning Act and long-term plans and regional land transport plans. So regional spatial plans, land use plans and natural environmental plans are required to implement regional spatial plans. Regional land transport plans must be consistent with spatial plans, and the Minister must take them into account when preparing a government policy statement on land transport. So finally, long-term plans must set out steps to implement the relevant actions of a regional spatial plan. So there's a very clear link with long-term plans now and these other regional plans, which we did not have before. So it provides an opportunity to get better coordination of council's investment and its other action to support planning. So we're looking to have a workshop with you early next year where you will set spatial priorities for investment to enable growth based on development capacity and demand, hazards and climate adaptation, and getting value for money and upgrades to transport, three waters infrastructure, community infrastructure, and open space. So that's a really important part of this, is looking where our investments can have the greatest impact and the development they enable. And this direction will inform an updated spatial plan, which we're looking to consult on in early to mid 2026. So this is the timeline for the update project. Looking to have a council workshop on urban development in February 26, so that will be on the activity strategies for the long-term plan. We're looking to have a council workshop on the draft spatial plan and looking at those spatial priorities in mid-March 26, to approve the spatial plan for public engagement in April, and looking to make final decisions on the spatial plan and in June, and to complete it in August. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. And you mentioned regards to the review that might happen to this infrastructure strategy itself and the financial strategy. Does that mean that will be coming after the long-term plan, because the approval, the timeline that you just gave us, would be a bit late for that discussion? Or is that coming on time for?
No, we've tried to sequence it so that any decisions you make on the spatial plan can usefully inform your draft infrastructure and financial strategy. So I think the current plan is to have those agreed in principle in the middle of next year, which will follow your decisions on the spatial plan. And then we will look to return to council in October next year with the draft infrastructure strategies and financial strategies, which you will then approve as part of your long-term plan approval process. So it is intended to be done in parallel so that there are no missing links, and then they will naturally follow so that your decisions are reflected in your LTP.
Cool. We have a list of councillors here. At first, we will go for Councillor Compton and Councillor Young, Councillor Randall, and we will continue from there.
Thank you. I have two questions. Given the critical importance of the growth modelling, was it the same company that was engaged as previous who did the modelling? And if so, did we ensure that all assumptions were retested?
Can you clarify which modelling? There is a few different things. Your population?
Yeah, the population modelling.
Yes, Sense Partners did do the modelling again, and they did revisit the assumptions.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, I noticed that there's 0% growth essentially for the next 8 years, and then it starts to ramp up. I'm wondering what drives that growth in later years?
there are a number of drivers. That I think the biggest one is international migration over the longer term. But I believe there is also a positive natural increase.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Young?
So I'm just wondering about unintended consequences of some of the planning decisions, and I'm thinking in particular, I think I've raised it once before, about a small property in Arthur Street, which is quite, I think his rates in credit have gone up by 75% because he's now zoned for 6 stories, but the section is probably half the size or two-thirds the size of this room, so it can never be built to 6 stories without the whole street. I mean, they're tiny properties along Arthur Street. And so what the effect is that he will be driven out because he can't afford to pay the rates there to his landlord. So, I mean, that's an unintended consequence of something that I get the reason why we're doing it, but it just seems to be very inflexible.
That might be more of a matter for, I guess, district planning and when rezoning happens. So the spatial plan.
The spatial plan, isn't it?
The spatial plan is more of a direction-setting tool, I guess, from a growth strategy perspective. So the update is looking to help council make decisions around where the decisions that have already been made on the district plan, how those are supported with infrastructure to enable the development to happen. It is not looking to make or relitigate zoning decisions because there's been quite a process involved with setting the direction from the 21 spatial plan and then through the full district plan review.
So then a second question, if I may, which might be more relative to the spatial plan. So I've been on council 12 years, and all that time everyone's talking about the fact we're going to do really sort of spatial planning for Adelaide Road, and nothing's ever been done. We're going to factor in where parks should go and that kind of thing, and yet nothing ever happens. So why do we do all this sort of half planning but not? In the meantime, people are buying bits and doing bits and pieces, but there's no council grip on what it might need when it's fully developed.
I think one of the opportunities with the spatial plan update is to provide a little bit more direction on those sorts of things, because then that can flow through to master planning, streetscape design, and other council business. So I'm aware that there have been many master planning exercises for Adelaide Road over the years, and council have made various decisions about whether to proceed or change those, and that will likely remain over time, but the spatial plan update provides a little bit more of direction around what are the consequences of some of those zoning changes and how does the council support investment in infrastructure to unlock those. And that might result in changes over time, but that's to be expected in a growing city.
But I did say
Thank you, Councillor Young. I'm going to put you back. Next, we have Councillor Randall.
Yes, I'm not sure if you can go back to the population slide. I'm just conscious that a lot of the work that drove the last district plan was based on a significant population increase predicted for Wellington City. That never happened. And so I'm also conscious that we're sort of predicting it still to happen, and even after a bit of a delay. Is it possible for us to have some, for part of the spatial plan exercise, some options around, changed predictions if certain assumptions don't come about? In other words, what the prediction is with Wellington, if, for example, the growth drivers don't occur.
Yes, that is something we will consider. What we are seeing is that we are still likely to see significant growth, but over a slightly longer time frame than was previously projected. Most of the risk in overestimating it, the risk is highest when there's spend involved, obviously, but most of our infrastructure is well behind, so this does give us a chance to catch up on that. So we would want to be a little bit more cautious where we are advancing significantly ahead of that, and I don't think we'll be in that position for a long time where we've caught up with infrastructure. But it is something to consider through this.
just to elaborate, next year when we workshop with you, what we'll be presenting is some economic advice around where the market's most likely to take up development opportunities. So the district plan wasn't necessarily informed by population projections. It was directed by central government around upzoning in particular locations, and the medium density changes that came through the district plan process have significantly increased the opportunities for development. And so it's not going to be possible to enable everything everywhere all at once. So being very particular about where that investment happens is what we're looking to achieve through the spatial plan update. So what we'll be advising is where we think, based on the advice that we've got, that's most likely, and then you can make a decision about whether you want to progress that in certain locations sooner rather than later, and in different parts of the city as opposed to others.
So we talked about alignment with other councils, and I'm just conscious of the move and requirement even to align our planning with other councils, other metro councils at least. Where are the other councils at with respect to their spatial plans? I mean, are they going to do one soon as well? Have they just done one? What's the story with Lower Hutt, Upper Hutt and Pororua?
I'm not aware of, Joe might know more of this, and chip in, Joe, if you've got other advice. Lower Hutt recently adopted a spatial plan of sorts. It's a growth strategy as part of their LTP process, and so they've got one. I'm not aware of Purirua having one. What will happen with reform is that where there are gaps, then we will collaborate and there will be a regional picture. What we're proposing to do with the spatial plan update is get a little bit ahead of that so that we're first in, best dressed, and a lot of the work that we're going to have to do anyway as part of the regional plan process we can do now, and then what will be useful from that is that can inform your LTP so that it doesn't delay giving effect to strategic priorities and investment to unlock opportunities.
Yeah, okay. And lastly, given that we're now operating in a very new and uncertain framework, regional framework, with major changes flagged, we just had a session this morning about that. Are we actually getting a bit of what would the implications be if we decided to postpone performing the spatial plan exercise until we knew the future governance, a little more about the future governance arrangements that are going to be guiding the region? I mean, it could be within a year we will need to do a regional spatial plan, for example, and us spending money on just doing a one for Wellington City. Is there a risk there?
Or is there a possibility to work with them ahead of what the mayor's already doing in collaboration while Lower Hutt and the rest of council also going to their long-term plan, just giving them ahead to working on this, what they're up to and how that align and going forward? Is that a possibility from officer perspective to do that? Not your question, I'm just adding another point.
Oh, sure. But I was wondering about, if we delayed 6 months, what's the implications?
The main implication of not doing the update now is that you miss the opportunity to inform your thinking and having a strategic picture for your LTP. The other implication would be that we wouldn't have a useful framework to base your developer levy system off, which will come in 2028. What we can do with the spatial plan work is understand what those infrastructure needs are going to be, so that when we're creating that new policy framework, that it's grounded in evidence. And that will be really useful because there's going to be quite a bit of work required to understand how we ring fence different costs, and usefully the developer levy system won't be subject to the rates cap. So it will become a very important tool for councils to use in the future to help guide investment decisions.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor McNulty, do you want to say something, Mr. Hodgetts?
I think it's a last and worst dressed situation. So we've got the bill being introduced to likely made law by mid-26. Got 15 months to produce a regional spatial plan, and by the time we're out of this process, we'll be first and best dressed.
Deputy Mayor McNulty.
Yeah, firstly, I noticed the line 50th percentile. So that, take me back to primary school maths, but that means that population or updated population projection, there is a 50% chance actual growth could be less or more than that line. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so that might be helpful for some councillors. The demand thing that you've talked about in terms of informing demand about where we might want to prioritise investment, I know there's about 1,000 units across the city that have been enabled through the new district plan that are sitting with resource consents that are essentially waiting for economic conditions to improve, and we should start to see a lot of those come through towards the end of next year. So are you looking to take consent applications that you know are sitting there to sort of help us drive that, even though that development hasn't yet been realised?
That is something we're looking at. We are monitoring resource consents. We've also have some economic advice on where the market is likely to build over the longer term. And we will have more information coming on that for you.
Cool. And finally, so 2032, we're looking to sort of match our previous peak population, but we're still expecting growth in dwellings to continue up until 2032. I saw some growth assumptions were baked into the previous presentation. So more ratepayer units are still going to be built in the city up until that time. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we do have a need for a greater number of dwellings separate from population growth, because there are drivers that with smaller average households and latent demand for dwellings is also driving that.
Just one of the challenges with, I guess, population projections as well is that they're so reliant on what's happened in the past to predict what's going to happen in the future. And I guess when we think about our district plan at the moment and how that differs so much from the 2000 plan, the 2000 plan was so restrictive compared to what we've got at the moment, it's probably not a reliable predictor about what could happen. So there will be some adjustments that happen over time, and it's just one of the challenges with using population projections to inform where we're heading next. They're so reliant on the past, and the game has kind of changed with our new district plan.
Councillor Matthew, next.
Thank you. I'm like weirdly excited about all of this. So I guess I just wanted to clarify, because the spatial planning process, we're looking at we'll drive our investment to support growth for infrastructure and other things. But that doesn't mean that growth cannot happen on a smaller scale in the areas where we don't drive investment, but it might be as, contingent on, consent conditions and things like that.
It's probably more around what infrastructure capacity there is to actually support it. So,
that's kind of that was kind of underpinning my question. What the infrastructure may not be there, but it doesn't mean no development can occur.
Yeah, it'll depend on the enabling infrastructure required. Three Waters is the major impediment. If there isn't capacity in the network, then there's very little you can do. So we're seeing in parts of the city now that Wellington Water are declining connections, and so developers are having to get creative about how they fill the gap themselves. And so there have been examples in northern wards where water supply isn't sufficient anymore, can't meet firefighting capacity requirements, there are resilience issues. So developers have had to self-fund solutions above and beyond what the network would otherwise provide. It's not a particularly efficient way of managing a network, but it's something that the developer can take charge of to sort out a network deficiency. So there are avenues. It'll just be infrastructure dependent.
Yeah, and I guess that was kind of leading on to my second question, because I hear some things that quite concern me about Wellington Water and their lack of enabling. Like I understand we have to put these requirements and make sure that the developments are safe and meet their requirements. However, I am concerned, is that something we're keeping an eye on in the interim, because we want to support Wellington Water to ensure that development can occur?
Yes, and that's one of the intentions of the spatial plan.
Beautiful, thank you.
Before I just go to the next councillor, currently there are some organizations, I'm not going to name it, applied for consent, but I think what we have is if you are building let's say 4-6 up, and there are 20 apartments there, compared to 20 households that we're building, the way Wellington Water approved the consent is separate and different. Is that right? If I make my point.
I'm not sure on that. Are you able to repeat that, sorry?
Example, currently Tito Moana applied for one of the, what they're trying to build in the northern side, and the consenting delayed because of some
That's right,
legislative
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you're correct. So that I think Michael mentioned earlier, that was to do with, I believe, firefighting capacity as well, and that development is in the north somewhere. I mean, I think Michael's actually outlined quite clearly some of the issues that we currently have and why it's important we have a spatial plan. Population isn't the only driver, and we've issued 80% more dwellings this time last year. So there was a latent demand for housing in the city, and we're seeing that bear fruit now. But with Wellington Water's current transitional arrangements, and to the earlier point I think Councillor Matthews was making, is that we're very careful at the moment to keep an eye on how the consenting traffic is going. We have some live concerns with a number of developments, including the one you're mentioning, Mr. Chairman, where Wellington Water doesn't appear to have the capacity to meet the service demands of those consents. So we're trying to keep on top of that, and importantly, keep on top of the transition to Metro Water, because of course they'll be focused pretty much on just standing an organisation up, not necessarily consenting for the development of the city. So yes, very much front and centre of our thinking.
Thank you. Councillor Calvert.
Yes. So, but isn't this partly that we've done a district plan and we just didn't put in the sufficient infrastructure funding for water, about funding the infrastructure that we've needed for enable growth, so that developers don't have to pay for it and then it goes on to the house prices?
I think it's probably fair to say that the last couple of LTPs were a bit of catch-up and a bit of fixing. Michael, you can concur here, I think, but we had a very low level of new growth investment that went into the LTP, and the idea here is relating to water, and the idea here is to get on the front foot and be first in line for when growth does occur.
Okay. Now, through describing the spatial plan, and it'd be really good if you could send us through some examples of what a good spatial plan looks like from other places. But I didn't see any mention of economic zones. You talked about doing an economic assessment about enabling more housing growth, but where do we see economic zone, the areas that create, key business areas, and how they represented within the spatial plan?
That will be something we will look at.
You will be looking at it?
Yes, land for business and, economic growth. Part of that.
So are you looking, so just to clarify, so if we've got a CBD, or you've got somewhere like Johnsonville, are you envisaging seeing that as a viable economic zone? I mean, are you going to put that on the map as saying we need, this is a viable, I don't know. It'd be good to get an example of what this might look like.
I think we need to do further work on that, but it's definitely something we will be considering.
Okay. And look, Councillor Young mentioned about Adelaide Road. We've also had plans for Central City. We've also got a plan for Johnsonville 2008, and we've been to presentations. We've seen lovely models about Adelaide Road. So really, what I'm looking for is, can we get some KPIs? Can we get some agreed outcomes of what we expect to see through this process? Because I'll be really keen to understand how we make sure that we land something this time, and it's not just a plan, but it actually helps build more houses, support our businesses, and so I'm really looking for some clear measures that we can measure this against.
I think as a governing body, that is something that we need to give a direction to officers. But if officer,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Councillor Calvert's making a good point, and it's a point you've made often, Diane. So thank you. But I think what you're seeing here is more joined up planning, more across regions and across cities in New Zealand. I think you saw that under the previous iteration in the Labour government's two statutes. You've seen it under this current government's two statutes, a very similar theme of joined up planning, regional and at city level. And the point, I suppose, for our own role moving forward is that it's been signalled, particularly in the new tranche of legislation, that we do expect to see regional infrastructure investment connect into local infrastructure investment. And that's where, in the past, we haven't quite got it right. So for a long time in my career, I've seen planning disconnected from infrastructure investment. And I'm seeing now, for the first time in my career, particularly in New Zealand, planning connect literally to infrastructure investment, because we're able to understand now that unless you plan for it and put the assets in the ground that growth can leverage off, then you will get sporadic growth in unplanned cities. So that would be my answer.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you. This is all really good stuff. I was just wondering how ready, I guess, our spatial plan will be to drop into or contribute towards the regional spatial plan. Are there quite different requirements, additional things we'll have to do when we contribute into that process? And is there any way, I guess, that we can limit that and do the stuff now that will support that?
Yes, we are looking to be consistent with what will be required under a regional spatial plan. We have direction from the planning bill on that, so we'll follow that. There'll be more detail to come on that, but I think the key parts of that, there's a reasonable level of certainty on what that will look like, and most of it is things that you would do as part of a good spatial plan in any case. So if there is a change, I don't think it will be wasted work, and being consistent with that for now. But we're definitely looking to follow the guidance we have on that and to be ready to go when that legislation is in place, and to be ahead of the regional spatial plan when we come to that.
Councillor Chang.
Thanks very much. I have two questions. The first question is regarding the Sense Partners report here. Could we get a copy of that at all? Because it seems to me that the trajectory that they're actually writing here is actually similar to the blue line, which makes me wonder what the metadata is like that is indicating that the growth is actually still increasing at that level. Because if you mentioned about the growth in Wellington is not going to come from natural growth but from immigration, so therefore the requirements for that immigration would actually have would be different to natural growth, I guess. So would that be considered in the plan? And so, yeah, that was the first question.
We will make the Sense Partners report available. That's not finalised yet, so we have the numbers. We don't have the full report. That should be finalised soon, and we can make it available.
Yep.
Yeah, my understanding is that there'll be more in the report on this, but that international migration has always been a strong driver of Wellington's growth, and that will continue to be the case into the future. But it's not the only part. There's domestic migration and natural growth, which I believe is positive also. So there is a whole lot of things. And yeah, but I don't know if we'll be looking at planning for that differently. We're looking at it in terms of scale. We are looking, citywide and over the long term. So that's the level we're looking at.
Okay, thanks. And the second question is on the regional spatial plan. Now, it's sort of linked to the previous question about where the growth is actually coming from. But on the regional plan, are we going to be discussing with, and I'll give a couple of hypothetical actions that we can actually take. Like, for example, if we're looking at intensification in the CBD, in the central city, which we are focusing on, if we have a group of people who are sort of looking at coming to Wellington and they want to move into a greenfield area, instead of Wellington City be doing that, would we actually discuss it with, say, Pororua to say that, what greenfields areas do you have there that available in your area? Could we actually look at our growth going up there? Is that the sort of thing you'd find in a regional plan?
In the regional spatial plan, yes, it could consider those regional issues and how growth might be distributed across cities in the region.
Yep. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Next time, no hypothesis followed by 5,000 essay questions. We have Councillor Osborne next.
Thank you, Chair. Can you just flick to the Planning Act slide? There's just a bullet point on there that piqued my interest.
Some of this is paraphrased.
I think it might be the next slide.
Yeah.
I guess the penultimate bullet point. The minister must take into account when preparing GPS on land transport. Is that novel direction that the minister must take into account regional direction when preparing, I presume, the National Land Transport Strategy?
It is new. There was nothing like that before.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
Councillor Foon.
Great, thank you. Just back to the vision, goals, directions. So just to clarify, are we keeping those as the basis for how we progress with this spatial plan, or will we be resetting those as well?
Our starting assumption is we would keep them unless there's a good reason to change them.
Yep.
So it could be for consistency with other council strategies or because of specific direction coming from you.
Great. Okay. No, thank you. Just wanted to clarify. The other one is on the workshop where we're talking about climate adaptation. Do we also have a plan for mitigation and how that works into this plan?
In terms of emissions or?
Yeah, how do we meet Te Atakura, for example, the city's strategy to reduce emissions? Like, how will this plan support that? Is there the opportunity to have a discussion about how we do that?
Yes, I'm not sure if you have more on that, Mike, but we'll certainly look at how they work together. Those
great.
two.
Yeah, I guess we'll be directed by council on the direction of travel there. The focus at this stage is probably on adaptation and what we can do to respond to climate change. I guess passively, the land use patterns setting a direction of travel where intensification will mean that we're not having to grow the city outwards as much, and that will have benefits for emissions from a transport efficiency perspective. If there are other directions that we receive from council, we can take that into account through the workshop.
Great. If we could bring that as a discussion point with some advice from you around that would be great. Also, just in terms of infrastructure prioritisation and working in with the regional land transport plan, I guess we've had the plan for MRT, and that shows that it creates growth. And so I guess what I'm wanting to see is how do we sustain or maintain that conversation with central government that is something we'd like to see to enable growth and a low emission city in the future.
So there is an opportunity through the workshop next year to help set some of that direction or reinforce direction from the existing spatial plan. So MRT is mentioned in the spatial plan currently.
And I guess also make sure that we've got a route maintained that that we won't close off through any planning.
So the real lever that council will be able to pull for that will come through the new regional spatial plan. So as part of that new approach to spatial planning, you'll actually be able to designate that corridor, and it'll be a lot easier to do than what you can do through the RMA at the moment, where you have to basically have a resource consent lined up, that level of detail.
We tried to do that.
So the regional spatial plans will actually provide the opportunity to basically route protect.
Right.
And that's going to be a lot easier because then the detail can follow through that process. I guess in terms of how that links in with GPS for transport will be an interesting conversation to have, because there'll be a government appointee on the decision-making committee that the mayors will sit on. And so whether they are there and supporting that and what sort of rights they have to make decisions is to be determined. But It appears there's an avenue to protect MRT through the new regional spatial plan, and in the meantime, the update to our spatial plan can at least continue a signal,
Great.
which might help with the regional plan.
Thank you. We have 3 people on the list and 7 minutes left. So, Councillor Tiefenbacher.
Yeah, this is a newbie question, partly answered by Councillor Calvert's question anyway. So when you were talking about growth, I just wasn't sure if that included economic growth. There seems to be a lack of industrial land in Wellington. I mean, there seems to be opportunities around the Granada area to create industrial land spaces and then also to create environments around it where there was residential places that actually service that land. Do we go to that sort of depth? So this is why it's a newbie question. Do we go to that depth in the spatial thing where we say this would be awesome as an industrial area with accommodation around it, so we are also working on the access to it?
Yes, industrial and broader business needs will be something that we'll be workshopping with you in the new year. Just as a piece of advice, there is a regional piece of work underway on industrial needs, and so at a regional level there is actually a shortage of industrial capacity. So there is a piece of work underway through the Regional Leadership Committee to identify opportunities at a regional level, and it is difficult to create new land, and Wellington is quite a constrained environment, so there's probably limited opportunities in Wellington City for new industrial land. However, if the council wishes to identify new areas where industrial land could take place, we can use that in the spatial plan, and that can inform a district plan change process later down the track.
Okay. Can I suggest we look at Granada quite carefully, because I think it's an awesome spot for that.
And Councillor Rogers next.
Yeah, there had been quite a lot of discussion around the population growth forecasts, but I was wondering, in the development of the spatial plan, particularly with the provision of infrastructure, how much were we going to look at other predictive models, whether that's economic certainty or developer demand, parcel size, proximity to amenity, some of those other factors that do drive development decisions, or I guess decisions that you talked about where it was splitting or smaller household sizes, those sorts of things?
Yeah, we do have some economic modelling on that looks to predict where development will go, so we can provide more information on that. The population projections aren't the only things, and population is not necessarily predetermined. We do have some ability to influence it. More enabling settings can enable greater population growth, and our economic advice says that in Wellington in particular, because we have a large population of young adults, their ability to stay in the city is influenced by things that council does, including enabling housing and infrastructure to support that.
Can I ask one more? And then my other question was actually around, I guess, the counter side to that and the council's position of how we were going to incorporate decisions for infrastructure planning in terms of cost efficiency, and how we then flow that through into things like developer levies or I guess some of those price incentives that Councillor Young was talking about earlier.
So yeah, that's an important part of this exercise. So we will be looking at where the district plan enables growth. We'll look at economic modelling to see where the market's likely to take that up, and then we'll look at where our infrastructure is constrained and where the costs of relieving those constraints and where you get the best value from that spend in terms of enabling the growth that is enabled by the district plan.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Councillor Ruity.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the work done in there regarding mana whenua and the prioritisation, which I would always support and always back. But my question is, how does the spatial plan work for Māori who are not in the Takaihere agreement, and how do they gain the best benefits of the spatial plan?
So iwi Māori more generally. It's a good question. I mean, we will be going out for consultation. I guess in our preliminary planning, we haven't looked to do any sort of broader consultation with iwi Māori in advance of the workshop. We have got some good guidance from the Regional Leadership Committee from the Future Development Strategy. So that's kind of the, I guess, the precursor to what we might see as a regional spatial plan. There was a really good piece of work in there capturing broader Māori interests in terms of housing and business and development. We have had ongoing conversations with regional iwi in terms of district plan, and we have tried to schedule some meetings with them in advance of the workshops next year to discuss spatial planning so that we have some guidance from them around priorities and whether they've shifted from the previous spatial plan, but we haven't been actively looking at how we might capture broader Māori views. So that's something that we can consider. It might be a bit of a difficult exercise before we come back to you next year, but certainly an opportunity through the consultation process that would follow.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up, or we good, Councillor Rubit? Councillors, and now it's 12:30, and we canvassed the question pretty well. And next year we will be back on February for the workshop. I think if you don't have I missed anyone before we just go? Good, I haven't. So happy holiday to you all, even though we have a meeting tomorrow.